It says I'll follow you anywhere. But boy, I feel like Hansel and Gretel and Little Red Riding Hood, and I don't know how many other people and creatures who've been lost in the woods. I don't know if there's any place in the contract with Calvin Castine that it says I'll follow you anywhere. But boy, I think today he's led me astray. We're in the woods somewhere. The only thing I know is we turned off Route 22 onto the Slauson Road, and I barely had time to wave at my friends Earl and Pat Parker on the way by the Sugar House. And then we stopped to meet our friend Ken Adams, and Ken says it's only 50 feet off here. And an hour and a half later, or at least 30 seconds later, we are in the woods. Ken, how are you, my friend?
I'm doing fine, Gordy. How are you?
I'm doing
Besides,
fine.
You think you're lost, that's all.
Yeah, well, that's all right. I got lots of people to get lost with.
You're not.
And I'll tell you what, it's better than the plight of those poor Russian sailors that are down in the bottom of the sea up there. I hope they do something about that. Yeah. We are in the woods here in Altona for a very good reason. First of all, Ken, you're a biologist?
I'm an ecologist at Plattsburgh State University, right.
And have been more than a week and a half, I know.
Oh, yeah. When you've got this much gray hair, you've been around more than a few weeks.
How long have you been there?
Actually, I first came to the North Country about 28 years ago in 1972. I was in the Air Force at that time, and Plattsburgh Air Force Base was my last assignment.
Oh, I had forgotten that. I guess I did know that.
Yep,
wow.
Yep. And when I was released from active duty with the Air Force, I really thought at that time, and have thought so since, that I wanted to go into teaching and be a teacher, college professor. So I started teaching ecology with the environmental science program at Minor Center in Chazy at that time in 1974. And in 74, the environmental science program at Plattsburgh State was just beginning. We were quite small, and the program was entirely based at Minor Institute. So it was a nice marriage between the private Minor Institute and the State University to start this environmental science program. And the program has grown since then, and we're housed at the main campus in Plattsburgh, but we still have a program in the fall semester housed at Minor Institute. And we're in Minor Institute's forest right now. One of the great advantages of our environmental science program at Plattsburgh is the resources that Minor Institute provides for us. The campus in Chazy and the over 8,000 acres of natural resources that we have to use for student labs and research projects. So we're in one right now.
So you're going to teach till you get it right, huh? 26 years already?
Yeah, I'm still learning.
That's fantastic. Ken turns up in the most interesting places. I think the last time we saw him was conducting another tour through the woods and bogs around Lake Alice.
Yes.
A while ago. You know, this brings me to reaffirm what I've said all along, that we have some pretty special countryside up here in Clinton County. And actually, parts of Altona are world famous for some reasons maybe we'll discover today, aren't they?
We will talk about that. And there are sites here in West Chazy and Altona that are rare, globally rare sites, with, as far as we know, fewer than 20 sites like this in the world at the Altona Flat Rock, the Jack Pine Barrens, where we'll be in a few minutes, and fewer than 5 in New York State that are like the Jack Pine Barrens here. So yes, they are rare, they are unique, and afford special opportunities for students to study and to learn.
So actually we're in West Chazy now, but near
Technically
Altona?
we're in West Chazy right now on the Barnaby Road.
Get that right, because I'm sure everybody will recognize it.
On the Barnaby Road just past Lauren Parker's house.
Okay, we got it. Well, why are we in the woods today?
Okay, I wanted to show you a typical hardwood stand in this part of the North Country that surrounds the Jack Pine Barrens. You can think of the Jack Pine Barrens, where we will be in a few minutes, if we're not lost. You can think of the Barrens as an island surrounded by northern hardwoods, typical kinds of forests in this part of New York. And this stand is owned by Minor Institute, It's comprised primarily of sugar maple and red maple and American beech and northern red oak. So it's a very nice forest, and I've had studies in here going on for many years, and in particular now we've been studying the impact of the ice storm in January of '98. And as you can see by looking up into the overstory here, you are seeing some tree recovery, but this stand was hit very heavily by the ice storm. Very heavy crown damage on most of the trees, and you can still see that. Some of the trees are dying, but many of them are starting to recover in the overstory. But when we have a disturbance like an ice storm, you tend also to look down, because even though the overstory trees were heavily damaged, the future forest is down here.
Down here
and
to our
so
right.
down here to our right is an example. I'm going to have students working in here this fall semester assessing the regeneration, the future forest here, which is now responding to the ice storm. What the ice storm did, it damaged the overstory trees, but that allowed a lot more sunlight down to the forest floor. And one of the effects of that is to release the seedlings that were already in place when the ice storm occurred. And we call that advanced regeneration, because it was regeneration or seedlings in place in advance of the ice storm. And sugar maple is a great example of a species that will respond to an overstory disturbance. See, look at all the sugar maple regeneration. It's just packed, very dense sugar maple regeneration, and it's coming in very, very nicely. So the total impact of the ice storm isn't negative.
Well, you know, I want to talk about that for a minute, because the word decimated came to mind when we talked about ice storm, and I came up in this general neck of the woods with the Parkers, who've been friends of mine for a long, long time. And I thought, well, to listen to see the tear in Earl Parker's eye and the other sugar maple people in the North Country, I said, man, here's a 114-year-old generation family business that may be gone down the tubes. Now, it does look far different today than yesterday, and it's not entirely negative. And I want to know, as an expert, are you surprised by some of this recovery that you see today based on what you saw in February of '98?
Well, as a person who loved this forest and has for many years, tears came to my eyes too the first time we visited this site. It was emotionally, it was overwhelming. And for people like the Parkers, who had, and many others in the North Country, sustained severe economic losses, whether it's the maple syrup industry or the value of the timber here, like these red oaks that are right over here. There's some red oaks. Here there's some red oaks. Valuable timber species that lost a lot of their commercial value. So the emotional side of the ice storm and the economic side of it was a severe blow for many, many people. And you can use the word damage very accurately. These stands were damaged. But in a pure ecological sense, we use the word disturbed rather than damaged, because disturbance is a natural part of forests. We don't like to think of that as people, but disturbances are a natural part. Disturbances by wind, disturbances by ice. This particular ice storm was just a bit more severe than most of them are, and the overstory trees sustained heavy damage in the economic sense of the word. But when you look to the future and think to the future, it's down here, and these seedlings are responding nicely to the environment down here close to the forest floor that the ice storm created. So we have a very nice future forest starting here.
How is it that some of those maple trees, which we thought were maybe gone forever, were able to recover enough to be tapped a couple of years later? That really surprised me. I know nothing, but in talking to people and seeing how sad they were at the time, I was amazed to find out that some of those trees were tapped in a relatively short period of time.
Well, the recovery of trees after a disturbance like that to their crown depends a lot on their root reserves. How healthy were the trees at the time the disturbance occurred? And if there's plenty of reserves below ground in the roots to sustain new growth and get things started once again, then you're okay. But I think that the recovery of trees that were damaged did surprise most people so far. I think the jury is still out.
Oh, it is. Yeah, sure.
On that, because many of the trees that have new branches are showing signs that it just might have been a spurt of growth and may not be enough to sustain the trees further.
Also. Right.
So that still remains to be seen. We can be optimistic and think that the new branches, the new foliage will sustain the tree indefinitely, but it might, in some cases, just be a spurt of growth. You can see in some of these oaks up here, I don't know if it'll come out on the video, but some of these oaks in particular have sparse foliage, and whether or not that's recovery or slow mortality, it remains to be seen.
Half full or half empty.
Yeah, exactly. Depends on your point of view to some extent, but I think in the next year or so we will know whether the trend that we see now is going to continue or not. But in part, that's why I've had students come in, and you'll see some tags. If I could just come over here, you can see some of these trees are tagged. See that aluminum tag? There's an aluminum tag on that tree. And
aluminum tags.
Aluminum tags on the oak trees there. So all of the trees in this stand have now been marked with a number, and we know what species, we know what size class they are, and we know at the time we did this in the fall of 1998 what the extent of damage was on each of these individual trees and what kind of recovery was occurring in 98. So now we can come back either this year or the next year and reassess each of these individual trees, so we'll know by species and by size what exactly happened in the intervening years after the ice storm.
I'm so glad to be here today for a lot of reasons, because it enables us to step inside a whole other field of study that the average person doesn't think of. We're all very busy in our own little microcosms, going about our daily business, and would never dream that Ken Adams
would want to do this
and his charges would be in the woods putting tags on trees. But it's absolutely essential that we follow this kind of thing. And the ice storm has written a whole new chapter in your book, hasn't it?
Oh, it sure did. And what we want to do is glean as much value out of the ice storm as we can. And education is one of those things that we can benefit from. I've had school groups here from the 4th grade through high school and college, working at different levels of understanding about ecosystems and how they respond to disturbance. But it's been a great motivator for students to learn about natural ecosystems, in part because the students of the North Country each lived through the ice storm from their own perspective. They know what the ice storm did, and they remember it and understand it very well from their own perspective. And then to come to an ecosystem and study it and learn about other dimensions of the ice storm is very, very useful for them, I think, and their teachers.
So what else in here should we mention before we move along?
Well, I just wanted to go over our basically what we've been doing in assessing the impact of the ice storm, and have your viewers get a good impression in their mind of what the overstory damage was and what the understory recovery is to this forest that is very common in the North Country. And then we'll move on to the Jack Pine Barrens and look at the impact in a very unusual setting.
You know, Jack Pine Barrens is something that people have heard about, but a lot of people have never seen. And hopefully through the Calvin Castine Hometown Cable camera, we'll get a view of some things that people just don't often think about or look at.
It's a very special place. It's very interesting ecologically and geologically, but it has an interesting cultural history to it too that I think your viewers would be interested in.
Let's take a look around. I should have known that the farther we got in the woods, the closer we'd be to humanity. And the minute I drove up and saw a Morrisonville Septic Service privy out here in the woods. I knew I was home.
This isn't
I
a
love
football stadium we're looking at here either.
You know, as we drove in here, Ken said to me, "Have you ever been here before?" And I said, "No." Calvin has preached to me about the $1 Million Dam so many times, I've never been here. So what is this and where are we now?
Well, we're at the headwaters of the Little Chazy River, which Mr. Miner dammed in the early 1900s, starting around 1910 or 1912, somewhere in that vicinity. And the idea was to generate hydropower, generate electricity using hydropower here in the early 1900s, which would have provided electricity for local farmers, most of whom, of course, didn't have electricity at that time. So it would have been a great benefit for the local people of Altona and West Chazy. And Mr. Miner built many dams in this area, and this was to be his colossal big one. This was going to be his big tribute to hydropower of the North Country, but unfortunately it wasn't as successful as he had hoped it to be.
Tell me why. What happened here?
Well,
I don't really know the story.
If you get a chance to interview Dr. Dave Franzi at Plattsburgh State sometime, he can give you the full story on it, because he's a hydrologist and a geologist, and I'm not. But basically, the dam is built on sandstone, which has lots of fractures in it, which means water is going to leak out. And if we get up on this part of the dam over that way, you'll see that part of the plan to retain water was to use the side of Cobblestone Hill, which is where we just were a few minutes ago. And by its name, Cobblestone Hill means it's a hill of cobble, and that's not going to hold water back either.
So this whole thing didn't hold water, right?
It was problematic at the very start, but Mr. Miner's engineers certainly advised him of the problems involved in building a dam at this site, but he felt that if he poured enough concrete on the bottom of the dam, that would seal the leaks and it would work. And so he also did that. And if we get up on the other side of the dam, before you leave today, you'll see about 24 acres of concrete.
No kidding.
But it still had a lot of problems and was abandoned, I think, around 1922. So it was a major project for that era. Mr. Miner reportedly spent about $1 million. That's why it's called the $1 Million Dam. $1 million 1910 money, and employed several hundred people up here. And the powerhouse itself, where they generated the electricity with the turbines, is about a half mile or so downstream. They had penstocks that channeled the water into the turbines.
So it actually worked for a while?
It did work. Reportedly, it did work for a while. It did generate some electricity, but not anywhere near the amounts that were required.
How come this cabin is here?
I think in the 50s, the trustees of Miner Institute built this cabin, or had this cabin built. I think a lot of them at that time were deer hunters, and they wanted a place to come.
That makes perfect sense to me.
Yep. When the trustees came to have their meetings here in Chazy, they met during the day for a few days, and then took a couple days probably, and came hunting up here at Flat Rock. So they had a very nice cabin to stay in while they were up here.
So we're in the area known as Flat Rock then?
We're on the southeastern edge of Flat Rock. If you look to your right, on this side of the Little Chazy River, you'll see hardwoods, very typical of this area. And across the Little Chazy River, on the other side, is the beginning of the Jack Pine Barrens.
Okay.
Very dramatic change from one kind of forest to another, relating to the geological event, the geological disturbance that created Flat Rock in the first place.
Okay, is this the way we're headed?
Sure.
Well, let's do it. Let's walk and talk as we go. There are a lot of special things up here that bring you back time and time again, aren't there?
Well, it's quite unusual to have such a dramatic change from one ecosystem to another. Usually when you walk across the landscape, the forest changes very gradually. But here the forest changes very abruptly. We just crossed the Little Chazy River, at its headwaters, and now we're on the edge of the barrens. It looks quite a lot different now than it would have 100 years ago because there's been so much construction activity associated with building this dam. But regardless, it's still a rather abrupt change. And as you can see, we're on pavement here. This is sandstone pavement. The soil is starting to thin out because glacial meltwaters, when the glacier receded, meltwaters came through this area in a flood and washed off all of the soil and deposited most of it on Cobblestone Hill. That's what created Cobblestone Hill. So you have more soil over there and more nutrients, more moisture, so you can support hardwood forests. Over here on this side of the river, where the soil was washed off in that glacial meltwater flood, we have very thin soils, or almost none at all, and it's very dry, it's very droughty, nutrient deficient, and so since you have such a major change in the soils over here and in the soil environment in general, the forest type has changed quite a bit. And in this part of the barrens, the dominant tree is pitch pine, and in a little while you'll see that it grades almost totally into jack pine. So this is a pine barrens, and when we get up a little bit farther, you'll see that it's almost totally jack pine, because jack pine is it grows very well on good sites, but it can tolerate and survive these extreme sites that we have here, and it's about the only species that can do that.
Let's talk about time here. Time is always a fascinating topic for me, and it wasn't last Tuesday that the glaciers came down through here. When was that?
The glaciers receded across this part of New York State somewhere around 11,000 years ago. And of course, when glaciers recede, what really they're doing is melting. The ice is melting, and the ice meltwater has to accumulate somewhere. And at that time, it accumulated in what's called Glacial Lake Iroquois, which was a very large lake to the west, and much bigger than Lake Champlain is now, for example. And as the ice receded and northward, an ice jam more or less gave away, an ice dam gave away, and Glacial Lake Iroquois drained very rapidly across Cannon's Corners and Altona and West Jay-Z, and drained into what that time was Glacial Lake, Vermont. So all that meltwater came out of that glacial lake very rapidly, and the force of that water moved everything in its path and dumped it into Glacial Lake, Vermont, creating this kind of a habitat which is now dominated by jack pine.
You know, people, you've talked about recent history, and it's hard for us to think about what this place might have looked like in 100 years ago in 1900. Now you're going back 11,000 years, and it proves to us how much the face of the land has changed throughout its history. And that's why we find seashells on top of mountains, right?
Yeah, the landscape is actually very dynamic. It's always changing, but usually it changes at a scale that is beyond the lifetime of an individual human, or even a society.
Does it make you feel a little insignificant sometimes?
It can, but you need to keep the faith, that's for sure.
We always do. Are we heading up this way?
Actually, we could
right.
take this trail for a bit.
All right, let's do that. Things certainly do look a little bit different here, Ken. Again, we've stepped off the road. As a matter of fact, we just walked down a 50-foot wide fire break that you said you constructed some time back. And where are we?
We're on the southeastern edge of the Pine Barrens, still in West Jay-Z. In this part of the Pine Barrens, the dominant tree is pitch pine, and there is a scattering of jack pine. I think that we have pitch pine here because the soil is just a bit thicker here than it is on most of Flat Rock, and a lot of the water drains this way, so there's a little bit more moisture here, and I think that's why we're finding a lot of pitch pine on this part of the barrens. You can identify pitch pine because it has 3 needles in a bundle, and the needles are 3 to 4 inches long. But basically 3 needles in a bundle, and it has these rather large cones that you can see to Calvin's left here that are also staying on the tree. But you can see that the ice storm had a major impact in the pine barrens as well as in the hardwoods. Over 70% of these trees had serious crown damage. Many of them were even snapped off below the crown. And if you look behind you, there's many of the trees there are just snapped off below the crown, and the trees that still have foliage on them were also seriously damaged. And to compare the impact of the ice storm here with the hardwoods where we just were, you look down at the understory, which is now receiving more sunlight than it did before. But where the major question is, when you think to the future of a stand like this that has been heavily damaged, where the overstory is heavily damaged, you look to the future and you look for seedlings, because that's the future forest. And you don't see many pine seedlings here. In fact, we put in hundreds of plots to sample the regeneration that's occurring here after the ice storm. We haven't found a seedling yet.
Oh, come on.
Not a one.
Why?
Well, that's our major question is why aren't we getting regeneration in this stand that's been ice storm damaged, but we haven't done any treatments to it at all. We just want to see what happens naturally. I think it's largely due to what we call seed bed characteristics. It's like when you plant a garden, you create a seed bed. And if you're going to have a successful garden, you have to properly prepare your seed bed to grow the crops that you want to grow in your garden. And I think probably the major problem here is shading by the shrubs that are responding, because more sunlight is down here, and the shrubs weren't impacted by the ice storm at all. The major shrub here is huckleberry, and as you can see, it gets 2 or 3 feet high, and in places over here it's very dense and is casting a fair amount of shade right down to the forest floor. And also you see that the organic matter and the other living plants at the forest floor are quite thick. This lichens that you see here, this is lichen. In fact, this is a species of lichen called reindeer lichen, which is very abundant.
Famous reindeer lichen.
Famous reindeer lichen, very abundant in the tundra. But this is a tundra-like condition here because it's cold and it's nutrient deficient and it's moisture stressed. So the reindeer lichen does very well here. But I think that the thick humus layer that we have here and rather thick layer of lichens means that when seeds are deposited here, that it's not a good seed bed. It's not a good environment for them to germinate and establish a new seedling. So we don't know specifically why, but we know the seeds are being dropped to the floor. You can see all these cones here opened up. These pitch pine cones, they've all opened up. You look around here, you can see lots of damaged crowns that are down on the forest floor now. They were up in the air, but now they're scattered all over the place. And the cones are opening up. They're releasing their seeds, but the seeds aren't taking hold. We have not found a seedling in any of our plots yet. So that is a concern about what is the future of this rare ecosystem if it doesn't regenerate after the ice storm, when so many of the mature trees are not doing very well.
The magic word is rare, and I want to reiterate that fact throughout our entire tour today, because what we're seeing and what we're walking through and our viewers are seeing based on what we say and see through the camera is something that's exceptional and almost unique.
Well, I think we can use the word unique because there are fewer than 5 sites like this in New York State and fewer than 20 in the world. There's another jack pine barrens up that's called Stafford Rock. It's near the Gulf, right on the border of New York and Quebec, near Covey Hill, Canada. There's a barrens called the Gadway Barrens, which is sometimes called the Blackman Rock in Cannon's Corners. And there's Altona Flat Rock, the largest of the flat rocks here in Altona and West Jay-Z, most of which is owned by Miner Institute. So this is probably the best example because it's the largest of jack pine barrens, or what the local people refer to as flat rock.
Yeah, we've mentioned the age of things. We never asked Calvin how old he is, but to give our viewers an idea, how old are the pines here in this stand?
Actually, we took some discs this summer. It's one of those things that I haven't had a chance to really study properly yet, but we haven't analyzed the tree rings on those discs yet. But from a few samples that we took a few years ago, it's looking like most of these trees are between 80 and 140 years old, which for pitch pine, 140 is an old tree. Pitch pine does not live as long as, say, white pine, which can live several centuries. So that's another concern we have, is we have an aging barrens. These pitch pine are getting very close, many of them, I think, to their natural lifespan, but it's not regenerating to a pitch pine stand again, and not regenerating to jack pine either. Partly because fire is the important role here, the important environmental process to regenerate these pines, pitch pine and jack pine. Both of these species are known to be associated with fire, where the role of fire is to reduce this understory competition that I talked about a minute ago, reduce the humus layer, and so the soil isn't as, the humus part of the soil isn't as thick, and the seeds can get right down in contact with mineral soil. And fire also opens the cones in the first place to disperse the seeds, especially in jack pine, which we'll see in a few minutes. You'll be able to see the role of fire in regenerating jack pine very nicely. But usually the age of these stands dates back to the last fire.
It's amazing because we've been talking about fire as being devastating, but you know, a lot of things have a way of regenerating, and rebirth comes from fire, and I think that is a very important point to make today. Although we haven't had a major fire in this area in a while. Last year it was touch and go for a while, as we discussed before the camera went on. It was dry up in here. Yeah, this year has been just the opposite. Yeah,
we certainly had a droughty year last year, and it was concern up here at Flat Rock in particular because we had so much fuel loading. You know, the fuel loading was so much higher than we've ever seen before because of the ice storm in '98. When you look around, you see all these crowns down on the forest floor, very flammable conditions, especially during a drought. And had a fire gotten started here, the cameras would have made images very similar to what you're seeing on TV this summer with some of those western fires. But fires are not always good and they're not always bad. It depends on the intensity of the fire, it depends on the timing, and it depends on the size of the fire. Lots of variables have to be taken into consideration, but I think that to successfully regenerate this stand under natural conditions, fire would be necessary under controlled conditions, so we would call that a prescribed fire. But even now, that would be a very difficult proposition because the fuel loading is so high. I don't think anybody is going to propose a prescribed burn in these stands now because for the next 10 years, the fuel loading is going to be so high that it would be very difficult to control it. So we need to think about other options for regenerating this rare ecosystem other than fire, which would have been the natural way.
That's why you spend so much time up here. That's the flora side. How about the fauna side? Are there any animals and creatures that are indigenous to this kind of a system?
Well, yes, there are. There's many species of mammals and many species of songbirds and passerine birds or the perching birds. In fact, now that you ask, I think that's a good chance. I have something here I want to show you. If Calvin could focus in over here behind his shoulder, I want to show you something that I found the other day that I don't see very often at all. And you can see how well camouflaged this is. I'm going to point it out right here.
Goodness.
I've only found 2 of these ever. And
wow.
Both of them that I found,
my wife is crying now,
have been right here in this stand. You know what it is?
It's a nest.
Yeah, it's a hummingbird nest.
Hummingbird nest.
This is a hummingbird's nest.
Wow. And
you can see how well camouflaged it is. I picked this up earlier to show you the birds had fledged, so it's okay to get get the nest now. But you
Look
see
at
how well camouflaged it is? That's why we don't see well, one of the reasons why we don't see hummingbird nests very often is they're just so well camouflaged. And it's hard to imagine that two young hummingbirds and an adult can sit on that little nest.
Never seen a hummingbird nest in person. This is a big thrill for me.
This is great. And you see how they use lichens. They take lichens. These are little lichens that they take off tree bark and line their nest with it. I think they use cobwebs, actually, to do that. I've been told that they do that anyway. And you can see it's only about the size of a silver dollar in circumference and very shallow in depth. But this is a hummingbird's nest.
Well,
Right here at
we
Flat
can go
Rock.
home now. My day is made. That's beautiful. As I said, my wife will be very impressed.
Well, you can give this to your wife. We'll be very careful with it so she can
isn't
have
that
her
wonderful?
hummingbird's nest.
That's really, really special.
Yeah.
That's just absolutely fantastic. I'm sure that many people are not cranked up by the sight of a hummingbird nest, but I'm always impressed by growing and living things.
Mm-hmm.
And as you were speaking before, I was listening for extraneous sounds, and I really didn't hear too many, especially at this time of day. I imagine at daylight you'd hear a lot of different creatures, birds.
Well, we have probably about, I have a list of all the birds that have been observed here at Flat Rock by myself or other people, and it's over 100. And there's probably 60 or 70 of those are songbirds that have been seen up here, either in the hardwood forest adjacent to Flat Rock or in the pine barrens. So there's a good variety of birds here.
They just decided to stop and watch us for a while.
It's not the time of day so much.
No,
yeah, they
it's
might be,
Yeah.
but it's the time of year.
Yeah.
You know, the breeding season is about over for most of the
That's true
birds.
too, yeah.
And of course, the reason that the males sing is to establish their territory and attract a mate. And that business is done for the year, and many of them is starting to pack up and think about going south again. So I do miss it. It's quiet. And when you come up here in
every
June,
once in a while.
when you come up here in June,
alive.
it's just alive with sounds, especially in the early morning. But quite a variety of sounds, and it's very exciting to try to identify birds by their song. Oftentimes you can't see them, but you know they're there by their song. But it's kind of sad, but it's quiet here now at the end of this growing season for the birds.
Really not a bad day for taking this walk and this tour. It's not too cold and not too warm. People complained about it feeling like a fall morning. We're in mid-August in 2000, and there's no bright sunshine today. There is a bit of a breeze that comes through every once in a while, and for me, this is not bad at all.
No, it can get very hot out here in
I bet
the
it
pine
can.
barrens. Extremely hot. So this is nice, I think.
What's next?
Well, you asked about the wildlife up here too. In addition to the songbirds, there's quite a variety of mammals. Of course, we have a lot of white-tailed deer, and we have coyotes, and we have fisher, and river otter, and black bear. Quite a nice variety of mammals, and there's a few species of snakes, not too many. But no rattlesnakes, I don't think. Although historically there are stories about rattlesnakes here, but I've not ever seen one. I'm not sure whether we actually do have rattlesnakes in Clinton County, but somebody will prove me wrong on that one probably. I hope it's not me. But the most exciting wildlife for me here are the songbirds, and I think that songbirds can be a nice venue for introducing people to the environment and to ecology.
Works for me.
Yeah, because they're brightly colored, they have interesting songs, nice behaviors, and after a while you can start associating different bird species with different kinds of environments. And the structure of the environments. Like we have a lot of bird species up here because of the dense understory. Birds, especially birds that nest on the ground, want a lot of cover, and we also have some overstory for the birds that nest in the overstory. So birds can be a very good example of a living thing and its relationships to its natural environment.
All right, Kenneth, we've moved a
Okay.
fur piece up the road, and
Yeah.
where are we now?
Well, now we're on the part of Flat Rock where the jack pine is the dominant species, or starts to be the dominant species. And from here to the north and to the west, all the way to Altona, is dominated by jack pine. But behind us is the effects of the ice storm on jack pine, and there's a little bit of pitch pine here too. You can see some of the taller trees. But these trees that are dead in here are all jack pine, and this is the effect of the ice storm. And you can see in here too the increase in the fuel loading. This is a very flammable situation now, where you have that carpet of lichens that we talked about earlier, right low to the ground, and then a dense understory of huckleberry, the green shrubs here, huckleberry. And huckleberry is another very flammable species. It has oils on its leaves that makes it burn very hot. And that can serve as a ladder fuel. It's called ladder fuel, of bringing flames up higher into the canopy. And now you have all this dead material of various sizes also that can help bring the flames higher up. And once the flames get higher up off the ground, then they're moved by the wind. So the direction of the fire is controlled by wind speed and wind movement at that point. So this is a very flammable situation now, and could be a very intense wildfire. But under normal situations, without a disturbance like an ice storm, jack pine across its whole natural range is regenerated, or the stands are reproduced by fire. And jack pine, I got a branch here to show you an example, is very different from pines like white pine, which most people are familiar with. When white pine, for example, when those cones are mature, they open up and the seeds are released at the time that the cones are mature, and then the cones drop off. And a few years later you get another production of cones. But jack pine's strategy is to hold the seeds in the cones up in the canopy, in these cones that are called serotinous, or they're very resinous, and if you feel them, they're very, very hard.
Oh my.
Okay? And what's required generally to open these cones is heat, and that's where fire comes in. And so jack pine accumulates these cones over many years up in the canopy. This little cone here is the year 2000 cone, this year's cone, and this one is 1990. These two are 1999. Here's 1998, and then you go back on the branches, older and older cones accumulating on each branch. So in a stand you can get thousands and thousands of cones and probably millions of seeds per acre, held tightly and still alive, but held tightly in these resinous cones until an event, usually it's fire, comes through, and just enough heat. You don't need a lot. You don't need a catastrophic wildfire. You just need enough heat to open up these cones. You don't want to consume the seeds. You just want to open the cones. So it, generally not a major wildfire is necessary, though sometimes that happens. So the role of fire in jack pine then is to reduce this understory, create a seed bed, open up these cones, the seeds are deposited, and a whole new stand is regenerated. And that's what happened on the Altona side of Flat Rock in 1957. The wildfire there burned about 2,000 acres in August and regenerated across that whole area a new jack pine stand.
There hasn't been a major fire since that time.
There hasn't been a major fire. There have been a few small fires, but nothing covering a lot of acreage since 1957.
Galvin lives on the Ridge Road in Champlain, and he remembers seeing burned leaves falling in the yard. And that's a considerable distance away, so that was a pretty good fire.
Yeah, that was a very intense wildfire at the end of a droughty period at the end of the summer. And oftentimes you can get embers, depending on the wind, you can get embers blown miles away from the origin of the fire. But we haven't had a major wildfire here in a long time. Again, these stands are aging and not reproducing. We have not found any seedlings in this ice storm damaged stand either. So we had several issues to think about after the ice storm. One was the increased fuel loading that we had at Flat Rock and the fire danger. the danger of a very intense wildfire. We needed to be thinking about how to manage that. We needed to be thinking about how are we going to reproduce or regenerate this rare ecosystem that had been severely damaged by the ice storm. So to do that, we talked with Mr. Herb Boyce, who is Minor Institute's consulting forester, and as a result of those deliberations, Herb contracted with a timber company, and we've done some cuttings over here. For lack of a better word, we're calling them restoration cuttings in hopes of restoring this stand. The instructions to the loggers in this area were to leave any trees that had a decent crown left on them. So if you look through here, you see there are not very many trees, but maybe less than 100 per acre, but that's what nature left us. And if you look on this side of the road, you can see there are not that many trees left with a good crown over here either. So they removed the damaged trees, they removed the limbs and the limbs and the broken trees that were on the ground, but they left the branches. We wanted them to leave the branches on the site because that's where the cones are. And the idea was perhaps as the skidders and the other machinery crossed the site, that the rubber tires and the chains on the tires might help to open the cones as they passed over these broken branches that were left on the site. So we wanted to leave the seeds on the site, but to disturb the soil a little bit and to reduce the competition from the shrubs, run right over it and see if we could regenerate the stand with the seeds that were in these cones. And if that failed, we still had a seed source in these live trees that we left on the site as a backup. So we'll go over here in a minute, and I'll show you what the effects of that cutting was.
And these are all experiments, aren't they?
These are experiments. We've never had to deal with this exact kind of a situation before, but we knew that we had a rare ecosystem that was not regenerating, was not didn't have a very good future without doing something. So our thought was, when in doubt, do something. So we did.
Okay. Well, the wags, and there are always wags, said that they're going to ruin the whole system, they're going to burn us up, they're going to ruin the whole thing. But guess what, folks? We have the living proof, and the emphasis on the word living. Beautiful new seedlings, some that are a couple years old, some that are less than a year old, right here, Ken.
Well, this stand was cut in '98, the first summer after the ice storm, in an attempt to reduce the fuel loading, the hazardous levels of fuel that were here, and to see if we could establish a new stand of jack pine here in this ice storm damaged area. And it was experimental. We didn't know if it would work, but we wanted to find a way to open these cones up without using fire, because fire would be much too risky to do that, and nobody was going to attempt to try something like that. So we wanted to see if we could mechanically open these cones and see if the seed bed that we left here after the cutting would be good enough so that the seeds could germinate and seedlings to actually become established. And if you walk through all of this cut over area, this is the kind of regeneration that you will see now. This seedling is 1 or 2 years old, probably started in '98 or '99. And if you look closer, these smaller seedlings, this one here, these, and these, germinated in this summer in the year 2000. And they're coming out of these cones right here. So we're seeing a gradual release of seeds from these cones. It's not exactly like a fire where all the cones would be opened up at the same time and all the seeds deposited during the same growing season. We're seeing so far a gradual release of seeds onto the site, and we still might for another year or so. We think at this time that we have somewhat successfully at least started regeneration here. So we're optimistic that we've established enough seedlings on this site to call it another jack pine stand in the future. Unlike the area where we had ice storm damage but no treatment, where we're not finding any regeneration at all. So the future of this stand, even though aesthetically it doesn't look like much, it looks like hell really, aesthetically, but sometimes what we think as humans what looks good is not what other species need for their life cycle. So we're optimistic that this is working, and we've done more cuttings. We did more cuttings in '99 and kind of wrapped things up this year in the year 2000. So we've treated a few hundred acres this way out of Minor Institute's over 2,000 acres. And the rest we probably won't do very much with, and see how nature takes its course on its own.
How much time percentage-wise do your students spend right here in the field?
In coursework, in my courses, we come here for only 3 or 4 labs out of the semester. But some students get turned on to ideas and projects that come to mind that they'd really want to work on up here and come back as independent studies or their own little research project that they do here. So in that case, they're up here quite a bit as individuals working on their own projects. And Flat Rock is also a part of a larger study on the impact of the ice storm. We have a grant from the U.S. Forest Service. It's a collaborative project with Cornell and the College of Forestry in Syracuse and SUNY Plattsburgh to study the impact of the ice storm across northern New York. And this is one of the sites that we're working on. And in that case, those are graduate students working.
I was going to ask you whether they're
species.
Okay.
Mm-hmm.
So there's serious stuff going on here at all levels.
Mm-hmm.
Not only that, but we attract scientists from other regions and other countries, don't we?
That's right. There are many projects that have occurred here on the wildlife here, or on the vegetation, the geology, the hydrology. This is such a special place because it's so different from the immediately adjacent hardwoods. So in a short distance, you've got such a very different system here that students can easily make comparisons between what's going on ecologically and geologically at Flat Rock compared to the hardwoods just a few feet away.
I'm not certain that the North Country Chamber of Commerce is fully aware of what goes on here at Flat Rock, and I'm further not certain that we want 10,000 people a summer trampling through here. The purpose of what you do up here is to watch things happen and help them happen without ruining what we have here. But I think it's just one more feather in the cap of this great North Country, don't you?
Oh, definitely. It's the educational value here is very, very high, and we in the environmental science and the geology programs at SUNY Plattsburgh try to take advantage of that as much as we can to link up our needs for our students with what Minor Institute offers for us in terms of educational opportunities. And it's the relationship that we have with Minor Institute and utilizing their natural resources helps to make SUNY Plattsburgh unique, actually, in New York State and maybe even in the East in environmental science and geology.
It's nice to blow your own horn once in a while, but it's true. You spent most of your adult life doing this kind of thing, so you have to be proud where you are personally today.
Well, it is gratifying to know that I've helped, and other faculty here have helped launch many careers here at Flat Rock. And in fact, many times alumni come back. When they come back to Plattsburgh, they take time to go to Minor. They take time to come to Flat Rock because it's a special place in their hearts as well as their minds. So oftentimes we see alumni here that we didn't expect, and you can talk about the old times. They come back to SUNY Plattsburgh to see their old friends, but they take time to come back to Flat Rock.
And see, for me, it started today, Flat Rock 101. I'll never forget this educational experience. This is a truly neat place. 2,000 acres, So there's more than you can take in the span of sight just standing here. But our viewers will just have to imagine. Now, tell us what some of the parameters are. You've mentioned it. It covers at least 2 townships.
Well, it covers land in West Jay-Z and Altona, and it's pretty much bordered by Route 191 and the Military Turnpike and Route 22. So generally it's a very large area that the Flat Rock is a part of.
Have you written any textbooks?
No, I haven't written any textbooks, just papers.
About time, isn't it?
Well, it takes time, and I'd rather be out in the field working than behind my desk writing a textbook.
So you've done papers? How many? Lots?
Lots, yeah. I don't know how many, and I've had quite a number of graduate students up here over the years from SUNY Plattsburgh and other colleges, and many undergraduate students got their hands-on practical experience doing research here at Flat Rock.
If somebody were to log on to the internet today and put Flat Rock in, I wonder what would come out. Are there websites? Do you have personal websites that cover this material?
Well, we do have a SUNY Plattsburgh website, and we do have Flat Rock on our website.
All right.
And you can find us under the Center for Earth and Environmental Science. Just click on that and scroll through, and you'll find some pictures of Flat Rock and descriptions of projects that we have ongoing up here in hydrology and geology and forest ecology.
I'm sure there's another chapter to this tour. Where are we going to go next?
Well, that's up to Calvin, I think, where we're going to go next. He has a few of his special places in mind that he wants to see again.
He wants to see my reaction to things. So, like I say before, who knows where we're going to be next time when this camera rolls again. I wondered what this long ribbon of concrete cement was here, and you said this is the end of the dam.
This is the retaining wall for Miner's $1 Million Dam, and the wall itself, I think, is 2,000 some odd feet long, and if the dam had held water back to its maximum capacity, from here over to Cobblestone Hill would be a lake. It would be covered with water, and if you follow this retaining wall in that direction, its highest point would be, I think, 35 to 40 feet up. But this is the edge of it.
And we'll take a look at it soon from the other side.
On the other side in a few minutes.
This whole day has presented me with a rather overwhelming experience, but to be on this side of the dam, to look out and see what we can see, is kind of fantastic, Kenneth.
Oh, this is a very unusual spot too, in terms of some human activity that occurred at Flat Rock. We're on the other side of the $1 Million Dam, and if we look this way, you can see the retaining wall. And the work on this project started, I think, 1910 or 1912, thereabouts. If your viewers are interested, Larry Gooley has written an excellent book on the history of the Altona Flat Rock, and he has a chapter on the dam that's very, very well done, and describes how the dam was built and when things were happening here, and also it describes the natural history of Flat Rock too. So Larry Gooley's History of the Altona Flat Rock. But we're still on Cobblestone Hill, and you can see why Cobblestone Hill has its name. This material here, these large cobbles, almost boulder size in many ways, was what was washed off the flat rock and deposited here, making Cobblestone Hill. So all of this behind us, where we have deciduous forest, that's on Cobblestone Hill. So this flank of the dam was using Cobblestone Hill to retain water, and of course the water wasn't going to be held back by piles of debris like this. So what you see here is concrete poured all around the cobble. The cobble wasn't moved here. If you walk into the forest, the surface looks just like it does here, but they poured concrete around all these boulders and all the cobble all the way down to the bottom of the dam in an attempt to seal it off, to plug the leak, if you will, so that it would retain enough water to generate hydropower. So this side of Cobblestone Hill for another mile is covered with concrete.
I wonder if this turned out to be an embarrassment for Miner.
I think it probably was. I don't know for sure.
He suffered too many major defeats in his lifetime.
No, he didn't, but he had several hundred men here working for years on this project. And of course, the first thing they had to do was clear cut the forest. They had to clear cut the hardwood forest that was probably here on this side, and then the pine barrens over there, and then start pouring concrete. And he poured an awful lot of concrete over many years to construct this dam. And it, like many wealthy people, I think he thought that if he could put enough money and enough manpower into it, that he could solve all the problems.
Didn't anticipate this kind of legacy, did he? Huh?
No. I think he had several very successful hydropower dams. There's one in the town of Altona now. You can see that generated power for a number of years. But this was going to be his big one, and it didn't work, and I'm sure was a setback for him, a very difficult pill to swallow, so to speak. But he didn't live too many years after this. I think Mr. Miner died in 1930, if I recall correctly, and I think that the dam was abandoned in 1922 or 23. So, but I don't know if he left any diaries or any recordings of what exactly was going through his mind with this project. I'm not sure if any of those records exist or ever existed.
It's a pretty nice vista here, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a very nice view. And if you look over in that direction, you can, the little plateau over there where the elevation gets higher, that's the cutting area that we completed in the summer of 1999 in an effort to regenerate jack pine over there. Yeah, it's a very nice view here, and on some days you can get a very nice view of the Lake Champlain and the Green Mountains on the eastern side of Lake Champlain.
How often do you come up here yourself?
It depends.
Twice today, I know.
Yeah, some summers more than others. It depends where I'm working that particular summer. Sometimes I have projects in the Adirondacks, and some summers I spend a lot of time up here. This year I spent a lot of time up here because we had an NSF, National Science Foundation, sponsored project here. Dr. Franzi is the project director. Dr. Franzi is a hydrologist at Plattsburgh State. This project is for college students. So we brought college students from several universities here to Miner this summer to do an interdisciplinary research project at Flat Rock, using this site and its hydrology, geology, ecology, to have students from various disciplines working together on the same site and sharing information about what they were learning here. So that was back in May and June, and that was a very exciting educational experience here, and with college students from a lot of different places.
They're the best of a lot of worlds here, within a few square miles of where we stand.
That's right. And students find it especially useful to come to the same site with different eyes, come to the same site and learn different aspects of the ecosystem. But eventually, we hope that they'll put it back together in their own minds to build the system back up so that they understand it from its geology, its hydrology, its soils, nutrient cycling, wildlife, plant ecology. So when students come to this area and spend days, different amounts of time with different faculty members from different backgrounds, they get a nice complete picture of what this site is all about, and it becomes very special to them when that happens.
We mentioned a few of them before, but what other special and unique sites are there in this Adirondack region that you particularly like?
Well, the Gulf is a nice area to the north and west here near Covey Hill, Canada. That's a nice, very nice spot for outdoor recreation and hiking, and also the ecology of the area. Valcour Island is special place, not only in terms of the history of Valcour Island, as far as its importance to New York and its importance to the United States, but it's very interesting ecologically also. Those are just a couple of the places that there's so many in the Adirondacks and the periphery of the Adirondacks right here. There's just so many places that have very interesting historical things to talk about and ecological.
And aren't we fortunate to have the Adirondack Northway go right through the heart of this magnificent beauty? And I don't know how many people are affected as I am, but you can see how turned on I got by a hummingbird nest. Every time I drive by Poca Moonshine, I look up there and say, wow. And it's happened every single time.
Yeah, Poca Moonshine is another great site. And there's a group now trying to restore the fire tower that's there and to preserve it, because there's a great vista from that fire tower, and it should remain there. So again, when people take a project on and it means a lot to them and they work at it, lots of things can happen step by step. And preserving the fire tower on Poca Moonshine is one of those projects. It's a great hike, and what a great view from Poca Moonshine looking to the north.
We ought to thank all these people who have their own passion. That's a favorite word on this program, and their own crusades to try to rebuild things, rejuvenate things, learn about things, and in your case, to share all that information. How many lives do you think you've touched over those years?
Well, I try to be humble about that, but
not the day for humility. Thousands and thousands.
Certainly hundreds of students have incorporated things that they've learned here into their lives and launched their careers.
Name of the game for you, right?
Well, that's why I do this, I think, is because teaching is very special. It's an opportunity to shape people's lives and influence their future, and so it's humbling, but it's very rewarding when you know you've made a difference in other people's lives.
Well, I can tell you for a fact that you've made a difference in my life today. I'm glad there's not a final exam, however, but I hope our viewers enjoy this, not only the first time they ever watch it on their local public access television station, but many years into the future, because when you think of it, this very program is a little piece of history, right?
Well, Gordy, I can sense that you really love this place, and you have endeared yourself to this place, and it is very special. And for those who come here and learn here and walk away with a greater respect for natural environments, we have our own little token that we give to people.
So much better than hard rock, right?
It's our flat rock ecology
love
button that you can wear proudly on your vest.
What a magician. I didn't see him pulling that out.
No.
I think that's absolutely fantastic. I'm okay now. I may even be able to skip supper tonight. No, I take that back. Ken Adams, thank you so much for inviting us here today. It's something that Calvin and I have talked about for several years. We finally got to do it. And I wouldn't be surprised if there'll be another chapter unfolding.
Well, I hope so. And thank you very much for taking your time to learn about Flat Rock and to make it a part of your life too.
We hope we've been able. We hope we'll be able to share some of our enthusiasm with those people who are watching this program. We urge you to tell your friends not only about this program, but about Flat Rock in this area and what people like Ken Adams are doing at Plattsburgh State and Miners. Pay attention to what goes on around you and appreciate what Mother Nature has to offer. It may give you a little perspective, a new kind of perspective on what's good and bad on this hunk of earth that we live on. And who knows where we're going to be next time for our little corner.